So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We've got an audience and speakers from across the world today. So a nice, diverse group of people joining us for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants program. I know we've got some familiar faces in the crowd, but if you are new to us today, like our speaker, Melissa, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through over 40 live free monthly broadcasts, all of which end up on our YouTube channel. Now, this week, it's been particularly exciting for me personally because we have dove in with our epic Frontiers for Young Minds series. We started off with John Van Stan talking about eco-hydrology, forests, and storms. Yesterday, we got to hang out with Chris Jones in the UK talking about climate change and incredible work to understand more about our changing world. And today, we're diving in on a particularly exciting program for me because of a recent documentary series I had the chance to see. I'll announce more about that in just a quick few seconds, but for those of you who have no idea what Frontiers for Young Minds is, I'm going to welcome in Laura Henderson, who is their head of partnerships, programs, outreach, all the good stuff that they do to help bring the world of science and exploration to kids through their amazing platform. And she can explain a little bit about what Frontiers for Young Minds is all about. Laura, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thanks, Jesse, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the broadcast. I'm joining you today from Switzerland, which is where our headquarters is based. I'm Laura Henderson, as Jesse said, and I have the pleasure of working with Frontiers for Young Minds, which is an award-winning, not-for-profit science journal for young people to read. So you've probably heard about open access in research publishing, and what that means is that anyone with the internet browser can read the research when it's published. Well, we go a step further than that. We provide intellectual access. That means that our science can be understood by non-scientists. So our articles are fully and freely accessible online. We've got over nearly 1,200 articles published now, original articles published in English, and over 35 million views and downloads from 230 countries worldwide. So we really are becoming a global science engagement leader. We're multilingual. We primarily publish in English, but we also have translation channels that include Hebrew and Arabic. And next week, we're launching our Mandarin Chinese version of our journal, which we're very excited about, with French to come later this year as well. We basically want to make sure that all the key demographics of young learners worldwide can access our top quality science in their own language. And what makes us unique? Why am I telling you all this? Well, not only is every article that we publish written by top researchers like Melissa, who you're about to hear from after me, but we also have Nobel Prize winners publishing with us. We're very proud to have a collection called the Nobel Collection with 15 Nobel Prize winners already, sharing their research with people like you. But we also have every article reviewed by young students aged 8 to 15. So they actually shape the science, working with the science mentors in 65 countries worldwide to ensure that everything we publish is fun to read for people their own age. And that's our mission. Thanks so much, and back to you, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I haven't noted this after that intro in our last two programs, but the kids watching these programs today, like, finish up this broadcast, head to the Kids Frontiers website and go apply to be one of these reviewers. You can work with real scientists like Melissa today, like our other laureate that we featured in the course of this broadcast series. It's such an exciting opportunity. I would have pinched myself daily to have the chance to do that when I was a boy, and I hope you guys have as much fun with that as I certainly would have loved to have done. Now, when I was a kid, I was fascinated with space and exploration and going out to the middle of nowhere to study cool animals with lots of teeth. The one science that I was it never got me when I was a boy was botany and plants. And that's because it really wasn't conveyed that well back when I was a kid. But that has changed so radically in the last few years, where there's this whole generation of scientists working to understand the incredible world of plants, which, let's be note, came out onto the surface way before our animal friends and have really they're what makes life on Earth life on Earth. We are the green planet. Incidentally, the name of a fantastic BBC series that I encourage everybody to check out as well. And I want to turn it over to Melissa, whose work has taken her from Florida to Vancouver, now in Norway, to understand the incredible world of plants, their interactions, and more. We're going to hope that the connection holds today. Fingers crossed. We might need to repeat ourselves a few times, but I'm so excited to have Melissa joining us all the way in Norway. I think it's our second ever broadcast in Norway. We don't get people from here very often, so this is very fun.
Very cool. Yeah, well, thanks so much for inviting me today. And I hope to tell you why I got to think that plants were really cool at a young age, and about why I think trees are really cool today. So first, I'm just going to tell you a bit about my journey to becoming a plant biologist. So I grew up actually in San Antonio, Texas, the home of the Alamo. If you know anything, ever heard of the Alamo before? And from a very young age, I thought that science was really cool. And I always wanted to know how things worked and why things worked. And I remember that I think I was like 10 years old, and my family, we went on a trip to Disney World. And at Disney World, there's this place called The Land. And they show you all about how you can grow plants by hydroponics and the importance of plants for humans. And that really got me interested in plants. So when I went to do my bachelor's degree, I did my bachelor's degree at Trinity University, and it was there that I first started studying plants. And I wanted to learn about how plants could see light. That was the first project that I started working on. And after I finished my degree there, I moved to the University of Florida. And at the University of Florida, I started studying tomatoes. And the question that I was asking while I was there was, what makes a tomato taste like a tomato? And so I was learning about all the kinds of chemicals that tomato fruits have that make them taste like tomatoes. And there I met this guy when I was doing my PhD, and he is a real Viking from Norway, and he is now my husband. And so that's kind of how I started getting connected to Norway. But before coming to Norway, I actually went to the University of British Columbia, and there is where I started studying about how trees make chemicals that they can use as weapons against a very hungry caterpillar called a spruce budworm. And there I met another guy from Norway who is my colleague Paul Krukene, and he told me about some opportunities that I could do to work further on trees in Norway. So that's why I ended up moving to Norway, and that's where I am now. And I'm at the Norwegian Institute for Bioeconomy in Ås, and it's about 25 kilometers south of Oslo, the capital of Norway. And we have lots of forest here. We have lots of fields here. And you can see here, this is the picture on the right. That's almost my office. My office is just cut off in this picture, but that's the building that I work in. So I work on trees, and I think trees are really cool. And I'm going to tell you about why I think trees are really cool and some of the questions that we ask about what can trees do. So why are trees really cool? Well, first of all, they help us. So we use trees to make houses, and trees also make lots of oxygen for us to breathe. So that's one thing that they're really important for us as humans. Trees are also really cool because they can live for a really long time. So this picture on the right is a picture of my husband actually standing in front of a redwood tree in the redwood forest in California. And those trees can be thousands of years old. So I think that that's really cool, like how an organism can be planted as a tiny seed, and then it grows up to be this really big tree and can be living for thousands of years. Another reason I think trees are really cool is that they can adapt to all kinds of weather, right? So if there comes a lot of snow or rain or a thunderstorm or it's really hot, we can go inside, but trees can't do that. They just have to adapt, but they can't even put on clothes or have an umbrella like I show here, but they figure out how to adapt to where they are. Another reason I think that trees are really cool is that they can defend themselves. So trees face a lot of insects that really think that they're tasty, such as moths that lay their eggs, and the caterpillars like to eat their needles. Or you have this beetle here, or this weevil that likes to come and chew on the bark. Or you have bark beetles that like to come in, lay their eggs inside the bark and then eat up the trees. And they bring together these, they bring with them these fungi that ride on the back of these beetles. And the fungi also like to eat the trees. But a tree can't just run away like we could. Instead, a tree has to put on its armor and fight and be able to defend itself where it is, since it can't escape. So how do trees defend themselves? This is one of the questions that I ask in my research. And one way is by having this really thick bark. So here I show you a picture of the bark, and that bark is acting like a wall of a fortress that makes it difficult for that bark beetle to come in and lay its eggs in the bark. Another way that trees can defend themselves is by having these stone cells in their bark. And stone cells is kind of like if you had a nice juicy sandwich, but someone came and put some rocks in there, I don't think you would find it as tasty anymore. So it makes the beetles think, nope, I don't think I'm going to eat this tree today. I'll go find another juicier sandwich that doesn't have these stone cells. In addition to the bark, they also make pools of toxic chemicals. And these toxic chemicals are called resin, and they act both as a physical defense where they can trap the bark beetles inside the resin because it's really sticky, but they are also toxic to the bark beetles. So they're poisons for these beetles. Okay, and another reason that I think that trees are really cool is that they can talk to each other. And this is something else that I'm involved in understanding. How do trees actually talk to each other? Because they don't have words like we do, but trees and other plants, they can talk to each other using chemical signals. So when a bark beetle like this one here comes and starts eating on this tree says, watch out to his friend over here. And he uses a chemical that's called methyl jasmonate to send that message to his friend and say, hey, there's bark beetles in this area and they might be coming to eat dinner at your place. So you better get ready. And another reason that I think that trees are really cool is that they can remember that a bark beetle came and ate them for lunch. So here, if a bark beetle comes and starts chewing on our friend here, that tree can then make a memory of the fact that this bark beetle had come and eaten on him for lunch, so that when the bark beetle and his buddies return for the next day or maybe dinner in a couple of weeks, then the tree can better protect itself against those beetles. So one of the main questions that I've been asking since I moved to Norway is, how do trees remember about these bark beetles? And to understand about how they remember, we used methyl jasmonate, that chemical signal that I told you that trees can use to warn their friends about bark beetles coming, to treat trees. And what we found is that if we spray methyl jasmonate as opposed to just spraying water on the bark of a tree, then the trees will form more of these pools of toxic chemicals or resin. So that way, when the beetles come to taste the tree has made a memory. Kind of like what I said, if a beetle had really come and eaten on him, they remember, oh yeah, that didn't feel too great when I was getting eaten by a beetle. And so then they can protect themselves. That's what these toxic chemicals are doing. They're helping to protect the tree. So when the beetle comes, the tree that was sprayed with water, he's like, oh no, wait, the beetles are coming to eat me. Whereas the other tree that got the methyl jasmonate, he got a warning that the beetles were coming, is ready to defend itself. So when the beetles actually start chewing on the bark, the beetle that eats on the tree that was treated with methyl jasmonate gets stuck, like I showed you in the picture, in that resin. Whereas the other tree that didn't have the warning, he didn't make those chemicals, so the beetle can just come in and start having his lunch. Another question that we're asking is, how long can trees remember? So if we treat seeds that are like baby little trees, if we treat them with a solution of methyl jasmonate and then we plant them into the ground and there comes a new baby tree, will that tree remember when he's a grown-up that he needs to be better protected against these bark beetles? So this is kind of similar to when you would get a vaccination, like when you get chickenpox vaccination when you're a kid, then you're protected against chickenpox for your whole life. But some other vaccines, like we're really familiar right now with the COVID vaccine, you have to get several vaccines over and over again because that vaccine doesn't last your whole life. So we're trying to understand whether methyl jasmonate can provide, like the chickenpox vaccine, a memory so that you're protected against the beetles your whole life, or is it more like the COVID vaccine? We need to treat them with methyl jasmonate several times in their life in order for them to be protected. So in conclusion, trees are really cool. Plants are really cool. They help us to live. Trees can live really long. They adapt to different climates. They know how to talk to each other. They can defend themselves, and they can remember. So these are the reasons that I think trees are really cool. And if you're interested in learning more about trees and how they defend themselves, you can check out our article that we wrote, A Battle for the Forest, Spruce Castles and Bark Beetle Attacks in Frontiers for Young Minds. And I would say it's a really great experience if you're interested in being a reviewer for this journal. I have a nephew who lives in the US, and we review articles together, and it's a really fun experience for me and for him to get to read these articles and help scientists like me know how to communicate better with kids like you. So that's all for me, and thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Melissa. What cool research. I honestly, anytime you're tracing elements throughout plants or animals or what have you, that the whole chemistry involved in that is so spectacular. And there's been such neat research. There's been so many great books in the last few years too. Secret Life of Plants. There's been, Hidden Life of Trees has been spectacular. So for audiences of all ages, so many resources to keep learning going. And Laura and you both highlighted this incredible article. I've linked it into our YouTube chat now. It's in our StreamYard chat, and I'll make sure all our registered classes from across Canada and beyond have it as well. Also, your tech got so much better when we went live. It's like a Christmas miracle. I love it. Melissa, we're going to dive in with questions soon. We've got a bunch of live classes with us. Our YouTube friends from Langley, BC. We've got Hamilton. We've got 2 classes in Hamilton, one of my favorite cities. So if you guys want to chime in the chat, please do. But I'll begin with a question of my own, and that is there a place that you've worked, having sort of traveled the world? You're in Norway now. There's some extraordinary stuff you're having the chance to get up to. Is there a place or something you've done that was particularly impactful, or is there a place that you really like to work that you haven't had the chance to go yet?
Oh, those are good questions. I actually loved living in Vancouver and working in Vancouver. There was a lot of great people there, but it was really expensive to live in Vancouver. So, and I really love Norway as well. But the great thing about being a scientist is that you get an opportunity to work in lots of different places. So one thing I didn't mention is that after I moved to Norway, I had a collaboration with a group at the University of Sheffield in the UK, and I got to go and live there for 3 months. And then I get to meet lots of colleagues from all around the world. So I really enjoy that part of my job as well, to getting to travel on a short-term basis, maybe to learn something from somebody else at a different lab in a different country. And then you also get to learn about their culture and their country. So I think that's a really great part of being a scientist.
Chris highlighted this yesterday in his talk as well. And it's one of my favorite things we get to talk about in Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Because I think you highlighted a bit of your educational journey. And for our students today in grade 5, 6, the idea of 6 more years of school and then 4 for a bachelor's and then a master's and a PhD seems daunting and terrifying, frankly. I remember my classmates when I was that age. But at the end of that, you end up in a job where you get to do what you love for fun. You get to work with people around the world. You get to play in your work, and you get to talk about it and go to amazing places and do amazing things. And if there's a better job description than that, I don't know what it is. So that's the joy of being a scientist. Very, very cool. Well, thank you for that. I'm curious. So you have loved plants for a very long time. You get to go and explore and do research with them. For people that are maybe plant agnostic, maybe they're more keen on the birds and beasts of the field, shall we say, is there a thing that you'd recommend or a way people can go about engaging with the plant world in a way that would get them as inspired as you are, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just go out in nature, go on a walk and look at all the plants around you. Maybe you don't really see them because they don't say anything. But if you go and look just outside, what is the variety of plants growing where you live? I think that's really cool. And then you just keep in mind, like, plants are basically driving our ability to live here on Earth, right? They make food for everything that lives in the end, because if you are eating a fish that comes from some kind of, it's eaten something else, that's eaten something else, it's come from some kind of plant or photosynthesis, right? So the sun provides that energy, and plants have to be able to harvest that. And also they provide oxygen, and without that, this planet couldn't be surviving. So to me, that's kind of really cool that plants can do that. But not only that, if you think about just the range of like medicines that we have, a lot of medicines come from plants. So plants make a really diverse amount of chemicals. Like I was talking about, some of them provide tomato flavor, and some of them provide defenses against different insects. And some of them can also be used as medicine. So one medicine that you might really be familiar with is aspirin. And that's called salicylic acid. And that comes from plants. And it's actually, salicylic acid is similar to jasmonic acid, methyl jasmonate, the one I talked about. It's also a defensive molecule in plants. But when we take it, it helps us to not have pain, or really common that to avoid having a heart attack is another reason that you would take an aspirin. And that comes from plants. So plants, they do so many different things that I think people maybe don't realize sometimes about how cool they are.
I was hoping you would just say the go out in nature bit, but I like the full-fledged defense of plants and how many cool things that they have. I mean, it's fascinating. We've had Wade Davis on. He's an ethnobiologist and has talked about the fact that cultures all around the world, this is something that we're seeing more and more as we're starting to recognize the value of indigenous ways of seeing and living in the world, that you go to places and there's hundreds of medicines that have been derived from the forest or their local habitat that we haven't even conceived of yet, or that Western medicine hasn't found. And so it's this extraordinary opportunity to recognize the value of the natural world in a way that is a very concrete, tangible, money-based way as a complement to its inherent self-worth. And I think it's so important for kids to get out in nature. We highlight this all the time. In fact, in May, we've got our Backyard Bio campaign coming up. I really encourage you to go out and see what species live near you. I think we all, you're walking along, you see an elephant. If you're in East Africa, we all know that's an elephant. That's very exciting. But if you're in a forest, a lot of us neglect understanding those trees that form the backbone of our entire ecosystem that we happen to live in. And if you learn those things, it's just a much more enriching and magical way of viewing the world. We've had speakers on that have talked about that. I think it's a really fantastic thing for kids. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm going to take a question from Charlie in Miss Wilson's class. He wants to know how a tree survives a lightning bolt. So if a tree gets struck by lightning, how are they making it through this? Because we don't usually, we can survive lightning bolts too, but a little harder.
Well, that's another cool thing about plants is that unlike plant shaped cells, so what does that mean? Humans, like my brain cells, they know they're supposed to be brain cells, and my stomach cells to be stomach cells, and they can't really switch to be a brain. My stomach cells don't switch to be a brain cell, and so on and so forth. Plants actually target the actively growing part of the tree, and that can become, those cells that are there can become any kind of part of the tree. That can become a new branch, a new leaf, they can become a new root. So if a tree gets struck by lightning and part of the tree dies, then the other cells, they can say, hey, we need to have this part of the tree again. So they just turn into a new thing. Instead of being a branch anymore, then this branch says, oh, well, we don't have a top anymore, so the branch need to become the top of the tree.
Amazing. Like that, it's so
and that's really cool, because this is how
it's so cool.
But it's how people are now, like, you can take just a very few cells of a plant and you can grow a whole new plant from those few cells of a plant.
Now, I'm curious, we talked about climate change in a big way yesterday. As the climate's changing around the world, are you seeing changes in how forests defend themselves, how they allocate those resources to insect defense? Anything that, or research that you might know about in the broader world? Like, is there a way that trees in particular are starting to change their tactics in response to anything in climate change? Might be no, I'm just really curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what I'm interested in when I ask about how do trees remember, is that spruce trees that I work on, they're actually really great at remembering temperature differences. So we have an experiment that's been going on at the institute where I work for the past 12 years. That what they did was they made the trees, so they did these crosses with the pollen, and they made the seeds at 2 different temperature types. And what they find is that 20 years later, the trees still remember that temperature that they were made at, and they have different times when the new needles open on the tree. And so this is really important in climate adaptation, is that actually spruce trees have a lot of flexibility in what they can do. And so we're really trying to understand what is it that gives them this flexibility. And part of that is the remembering that I talked about.
So cool. Melissa, we're going to head to one of your favorite places or nearby in Langley, BC for Miss Math's class. They want to know, if you cut a tree down to study its rings, what would a beetle infestation look like in the rings if the tree's able to survive it? Very detailed question, guys.
Yes, but that's a very cool question because, like I said, if a tree experiences an attack by a beetle, then it knows that it needs to get ready for beetles later. So it turns on those pools of toxic chemicals that I showed you. It will actually start making those toxic chemicals. So what you can do is when you cut down a tree and look at the tree rings, you can actually see a history of when the beetles came, because those pools of toxic chemicals will actually still be in the rings. And we can see evidence that, oh, well, 100 years ago, there was a bark beetle outbreak in this forest, and there's lots of these toxic pools, these resin ducts, as they're called, were made in that year.
Do you actually, you preempted the question from Miss Math's class as like a follow-up to that with that answer, which is spectacular. I will note too, just for our audience, we got a big Canadian audience today, United States and sort of the western region of the countries. And one of the fantastic things highlighted in the Green Planet is that there's these beetles that impact the trees. And classically, the winter was cold enough to kill a lot of their larvae. And now it is too warm to do that. And so the beetles have run rampant in a way that they never have before and have sort of denuded these entire hillsides and ecosystems. So as we're seeing things get warmer, we're changing that balance, that relationship between plants and their parasites in a really impactful way. That's, I mean, it's devastating, frankly, but fascinating at the same time. So I'm really glad we got that question. Miss Wilson's class, Alexis, wants to know how long it takes for a tree to grow fully.
Well, I mean, the tree doesn't stop growing, really. So it will keep on growing. But the question we often ask, and this is for purposes of like breeding. So if you want to select a tree and say, I'm going to plant this tree because I want to make houses, for example, then you want to know, when does the tree come to maturity? So kind of like humans, like when do we go through puberty? And trees usually take about 15 to 20 years, something like that, a spruce tree, 15 to 20 years before they become mature, before they can actually make seeds.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. I will note too for Miss Wilson's class, because I know where they are geographically in the world. If you go about 30 minutes south of you, there's a huge, like 500-year-old maple near St. Catharines, which is a really cool tree. You can probably look this up online and you can see how big trees can get if nothing else takes them out. It's a really extraordinary individual tree, and I encourage you to go see it. We're going to head to our Beardmore Public School, folks. Janine, Beardmore Public School, you're both in the broadcast together, but whoever wants to unmute their mic, I can come to you guys for a question. Whenever you're good, I'll bring you in. You're both technically in right now. Hey, Beardmore and Ms. McCallum, Droop. Unmute, let me know you have a question, and we'll go from there. Hey, there we are.
All right, we're ready for you.
Perfect, go for it. Ms. McCallum, are you going to share a question? You're live, you're on camera.
Yeah, actually, Beardmore is unmuted right now, and they're trying to talk, but
Perfect. Okay, they're in. Hi, Beardmore.
Okay. How long does it take to build up the toxins?
How long does it take to build up the toxins, Melissa?
Oh, that's a good question. So those new pools of toxins take about, it's like 14 days to 4 weeks. So 14 to 32 days, something like that. It takes for those toxins to build up once they get the new signal. But the nice part about it is that if they remember that the beetles came there before, then the toxins are ready. So that's why they're more protected against beetles when they come back with their friends.
Okay. Hey, great question, Beardmore. You guys on YouTube are fantastic too. Thank you for all these great questions. So Scarlett in Miss Alabakopoulos' class wants to know what ingredients are inside of a seed from a tree that help make a new one. So you go on the DNA angle for this, or explain sort of the resources that are inside a seed to help it grow? Anything you want to share would be great.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good and complicated question. So it has like all of the DNA stuff that it needs. So all of the blueprints that it needs to know how to make a new tree, that's all contained in your seed. But it also has some carbon, because carbon is what we feed off of. So it needs to have a little bit of energy. It's like, you packed your trail mix inside the seed, because it needs the trail mix until it's able to grow big enough that it can do its own photosynthesis, that it can take energy from the sun. And to be able to do photosynthesis, it needs to have some kind of green material, right? The leaves or something like that. But it takes it a little bit. It has to start growing and then make those leaves before it can do that. So mom packs trail mix in the seed so that it'll be able to survive till then.
I like that analogy very much. And another one for kids would be an egg, where we have the yolk. The yolk is literally that bit of trail mix, that energy for a growing baby chicken to grow before it can get up and eat for itself. The thing about plants too, and I find this, I mean, it's so common knowledge, but we sort of gloss over it. Like, the tree makes itself out of air. If you have a sequoia with a seed that's this big, it becomes a 300-foot monstrosity by eating air in a very real sense, and that is spectacular. It's like black magic. Plants are so cool in that way. So thank you, Scarlett, for the great question. Reha in Miss Wilson's class wants to know why insects like trees to begin with. Why are they so delicious, Melissa?
Well, insects like trees, just like we like, I like broccoli, but maybe not everybody does. But basically, trees are full of carbon, which is our energy, basically. Trail mix, you could say. It's like insect trail mix. But insects need to be able to eat something. And of course, there's this coevolution between the insects. So because the tree doesn't want to get eaten just as much as the insect wants to eat the tree. So insects are really cool too, in how they can fight against all of these defenses that the trees have, because their main goal is that they're ready for lunch. And that's what the tree is.
Yeah. I love thinking about insects and plants as like the largest or the longest battleground on land on planet Earth. I mean, like, there's literally no two competitors that have been at it for longer than plants and insects. And it's so spectacular to see some of the innovations for that. And as you said, the production of some of these chemicals that now, hundreds of millions of years later, in an entirely different context than which they were evolved, you have these chemicals that can be used for medicine in people that were originally designed to support insects. I mean, that is like, it's like one of the coolest things ever. So I'm really glad we got that question. Thanks, guys. Alexis at Beardmore wants to know, when animals make their homes or holes in trees, does it damage the tree in any way, Melissa?
Well, I guess it depends on how that happens. So like a bird putting its nest, that's not really damaging the tree in any way. But there are lots of insects that make their homes in trees. And there's they can cause what's called pineapple galls, for example, on spruce. But the main thing is that if an insect or a fungus is making its home in a tree, then it's probably using up some of the energy that a tree is making. But if like a raccoon or something comes and makes a hole in a tree, probably the tree will be just fine. So there's a lot of examples of that, actually, that really old oak trees that are maybe 500 years old, they have these hollows on the inside. And actually that's really important for making shelters for animals as well, and providing biodiversity in our forest.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I was going to follow up with it no matter what. This is something that a lot of people, we see a dead or dying tree, and we're so used to managing ecosystems that we're like, oh, let's cut it down. And in fact, those places serve as huge repositories for animals of all kinds that can burrow in the sort of decaying tree and provide that habitat for them. So it's really important, as we start to change our views on ecosystems, to leave the things that are decaying in some way, because they're crucially important to other life. You also mentioned a word that I'm going to harp on because it's one of the coolest things in nature, and that are gulls. I encourage everybody to look up gulls when you're done this program. In fact, you can find them pretty much no matter where you are on this planet. If you walk around and look at leaves really carefully, you'll see these weird protrusions from them, certainly where I've grown up in Canada. And if you look up what that is and how those form, it's one of the coolest, freakiest things in all of nature. So gulls are very cool, and thank you for mentioning that, Melissa. Wow, we have so many questions coming in. This is fantastic, guys. Okay, Let's see. Christian, as Alabacopoulos' class wants to know, how long it takes a tree to replace the branches or limbs that get damaged, or if there's a benchmark for this.
Yeah, so like I said, trees don't really stop growing. So every year they can make new buds, and those new buds will then become new shoots, and those new shoots will then become new branches. So every year they have the opportunity to kind of fix themselves again. So that's really cool about trees.
Yeah, very, very cool. And then Taboo, same class, wants to know what other things are inside of the trees besides toxic chemicals?
Yeah, well, there's those stone cells like I talked about, but also you have like water in the trees that's moving up and down, and you have lots of fiber in trees, of course, because if you think about like what is it about the tree that allows you to make a house of it, and it's actually like these fiber and carbon, and those are the things that make the tree structurally be a tree. But if you're talking about other kinds of chemicals or ways that the tree can defend itself, you also have things like enzymes, which are, they can be like, think about little Pac-Men that could come and eat something.
Like
so
that.
The tree makes these little Pac-Men, and the Pac-Men can come and start eating up the exoskeleton of a beetle, for example. So the trees also make Pac-Men. So those are some other things that trees make.
My new favorite analogy in the entire Frontier series, so thank you for that. Time flies and you're having fun, folks. We're going to take two more questions from our folks at Beardmore Public School. So thank you for sharing in the chat. Nate wants to know, how long does a tree generally live?
So it's really dependent upon what tree we're talking about. So like I said, for like spruce trees or conifer trees, trees that make cones, they can live hundreds of years. But then maybe some other trees, like I think about poplar trees, maybe they don't live as long, maybe only 100 years. So it kind of depends on what species of tree that you're talking about.
I will note for our students that are keen, the bristlecone pine is, to my knowledge, still, Melissa, the oldest tree on earth that we know of. In fact, the location of the oldest one specifically is kept like a closely guarded secret so that people can't just go up and cut it down or do weird things to it. But 4,000 plus years, maybe 4,500. I could be wrong on that. Sorry if I got that a little long, but like, that's amazing. I mean, it's like the pyramids. It's like it's 2,000 years before Christianity. It's. I mean, pick your historical event, and those trees have probably seen it, which is insane.
Yeah, and if you think about how the environment has changed in that period of time, right? So one of my favorite places in Washington State is I think it's called Ginkgo State Park. But basically, you have all these petrified trees that are there. That it was once a rainforest, but now it's desert. So you think about that, like environmental change that bristlecone pine has experienced in those. So that's what makes it really cool, I think, to study these conifers, is that they can live so long and see so many different types of environments.
Very, very cool. Trace adds, and just a final question for us today, is there an average size of the spruce trees or the trees that you work with?
So that's a really good question and kind of a cool question, because one thing I really miss about living in British Columbia is the size of the tree. So if you think about where is a tree growing, you can have trees up on a mountaintop, and those trees, they don't grow very much every year. And every year, maybe there comes a whole lot of snow and it's on the tree and compacting the tree. So it's really dependent upon the environment that it grows up in. But if you're living on the coast of British Columbia, there's a lot of rain. It's longer days in the summertime. So those trees, they go really, really big.
Okay. And Melissa, I know I said that was the last question, but I lied. So I'm going to bring in one more from Ember Lee really quick. Cool name, by the way. Wants to know if trees can regrow their bark if a human or animal peels it off or not.
Yes, they can. So a tree, it has kind of in the middle part of the tree, those cells die, but the outside of the tree, those cells are growing and living, so they could just replace the bark over time.
Very cool. Melissa, this has been so much fun. Thank you for the hyper enthusiastic sort of quick dive in on plants. I really encourage our audience, check out the entire Frontiers for Young Minds website there. You can check out Melissa's fantastic article here, and I'll put that in a link for everyone at the end of the broadcast as well. And if you want to check out the details for our final part of the series in just like an hour and a bit, you can check it out on our exploringbytheseat.com/frontiers. Our fourth and final, sadly, program is happening very soon with the Don Verderio. But Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today, and keep up the amazing work and have a wonderful
and
rest
thanks
of your
to those great kids for asking amazing questions. Those are really good questions. So
Really
thank you.
good questions.
So much fun.
This is the joy of what we get to do. We get questions that are every bit as detailed as what adults would ask, but people aren't afraid to ask them because they're kids. So a huge kudos to all our classes live on YouTube and beyond. We wish you the very best rest of your day. Have a wonderful time. Thank you all.